Hey everyone, welcome to this week's Wednesday night video. I hope that your week is going well, and dang, we are in the month of July. I have no idea where this year has gone. It's just been flying by. Time in quarantine and with everything going on has just become an illusion. Like, time doesn't exist anymore. It's fine. But I'm really excited because with the new month and all that, we are going to be starting a brand new series. And it's a series that I am really excited about because it's a book that I really love that we're going to be going through, and one that I think is going to be really great. So the name of our new series is Change and Consistency. And it's going to be a series in the book of Daniel. So in this series, we're going to be going through the book of Daniel and to be looking at how we can handle and embrace the things that change in our lives and also those that stay the same. So I think it's going to be really good, especially gearing up for, what's coming in the future and all of that. So for a little bit of background, Daniel is one of the major prophets of the Old Testament. You have Isaiah, you have Ezekiel, you have Jeremiah, and you have Daniel. So there's four of them. And he's the fourth. He's the last book of the major prophets. And his book recounts his life as a prophet, his ministry, what happened with all the different kings that he interacted with, all of that. And then also it details a lot of the visions that he had from God in the form of dreams and things like that. So we're going to be going through the book of Daniel to be looking again at how to handle and embrace the things that change and the things that stay the same. Hence the title, Change and Consistency. So today we are going to be looking at an important concept within that bubble that many of us are going to be facing this fall, and we all are going to continue to face throughout our lives countless times, and that's tackling a new season. So throughout our lives, things change. It's just the way things go. Some doors open, others close. There's lots of change, and oftentimes these changes are marked by new seasons of our lives, either beginning or ending. So you start a new year of school, or you graduate and go to a different school, or you start a new job, or you begin a new relationship, or you different things like that, where it's this, a marked change, where something different is happening. And a lot of times these big changes in these new seasons can seem kind of overwhelming or uncertain or really big and confusing, and it can be a little daunting. We maybe don't want to, we're maybe not the most excited about it, or we're maybe not sure of how to handle it. So today we're going to be looking at the book of Daniel and looking at how Daniel handled a really big change in his life in order to learn how to better handle the big changes in our own lives. So to do that, we are going to be looking at Daniel chapter 1, the whole chapter, and seeing what Daniel did with a new season in his life starting and seeing what we can do about that. So go ahead and grab your Bibles and let's go ahead and dig into the first major section of Scripture that we're going to be looking at. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. So in these first few verses, we see that Daniel and his friends who he is going to be doing ministry with have been taken into captivity in Babylon by King Nebuchadnezzar, who's forcing them to change their names, follow Babylonian customs, do a lot of that kind of stuff. And they're going to be training to be working for him and having to complete all of these different things. So now for reference, Babylon is basically the opposite of all things biblical and goes against most things that God stands for. So Babylon is typically like the antithesis of like Jerusalem and Judah and a lot of the places like that you read in the Old Testament, and that it worships other gods, it is super cruel, and like it's not a great place. It's like the epitome of all things just like earthly and wrong with the world. So Daniel and his friends getting brought into Babylon and being forced to work for the king, and their original names are taken away from them, which is like a link to their heritage and all of that. It's a big change. And so this is going to be like a big and difficult new season that Daniel's entering into, because I mean, if I were Daniel, I wouldn't want to be in Babylon. I wouldn't want to be working there. I wouldn't want to be working for the king. I wouldn't want to be doing a lot of that stuff. It'd be a big new change that I would not want. But what's interesting is we see in verse 2, it says that the Lord delivered them into this. Like the Lord, like God is who brought this new season in. And so that's something we need to remember as we're entering new seasons of our life, is that God is ushering us into this season. But so looking at this and looking at what Daniel and his friends are up against and this new season that they're entering, you may be wondering, well, okay, what do they do in response to this? How do they handle this? How do they handle being brought into Babylon? And basically, what does Daniel do in response to this huge and less than desirable change in his life? And that's what we're going to get into in the next batch of verses. So if you'll go ahead and take a look, you'll see that it says, "But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission to not defile himself in this way. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, 'I am afraid of my lord the king, who is assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you.' Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, 'Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see.' So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine that they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead." So what we really see in this next chunk of the story is that the way that Daniel responded to this new season and this new challenge and what he was going up against and what he was going to have to face is that he was faithful to God above all else. It said that he resolved to not defile himself. He didn't want anything to come between him and God, and he chose to be faithful to God and honor God above doing anything else. And we see that the way that he went about doing this is that first he determined he wouldn't do anything to defile himself. He didn't want anything to come in between him and God or bring him down or strip any of that away from him. So that was the first thing he did, was he decided, I'm going to be faithful. I'm going to remain faithful to God. That's the first thing he did. Then the second thing that he did was he set out to establish a plan to make sure that he wouldn't stumble and fall and be defiled in the eyes of God. So not only was he like, I'm going to be faithful to God. The end. End of Daniel chapter 1. But we see that immediately after he set out a plan. He went and talked to the official and was like, hey, I don't want to defile myself with eating the king's food and drinking the king's wine. And here's what I'm going to do instead. Give me 10 days and let me and my friends just eat vegetables and drink water, and then I'll let you decide based off of what you see, what you do with us. So he not only decided hey, I'm going to be faithful to God, but he set out a plan for how to actually do that, how to actually be faithful. He didn't just leave it as this abstract concept, but he actually came up with a tangible, realistic plan with a real timeline of okay, we have 10 days. This is what we're going to do. All of that. And then the last thing he did to be faithful to God was that he actually executed this plan. So it wasn't just okay, that's a really great plan, and then he never followed through on it. No, he followed through on it, and he executed this plan. He went the 10 days of just eating vegetables and drinking water and doing nothing else. And he set out this plan because he knew then by completing this plan, it would also help him in the long term. So he was looking at not just his short-term goals of here's this plan, but he was also looking at how doing this short-term thing would affect the rest of the season. So, okay, if I remain faithful to God now and do this thing now, how is that going to affect me for the rest of my time in Babylon? And Daniel thought about that, and he executed this plan. He actually followed through with it. He didn't just let it be this grand idea that he never, followed through on, but he actually did it. And so now you may be wondering, well, so what happened because of Daniel's faithfulness? Okay, great. Daniel was faithful to God. He came up with a plan, followed through with it, but then what happened because of it? Did it work? Did it not work? What happened? And this is what we see in the last verses of Daniel chapter 1. So if you'll go ahead and look at it, you'll see that it says, to these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. So here in this conclusion of Daniel chapter 1, we see that Daniel's faithfulness to God at the start of this new season was rewarded and blessed Daniel and his friends for the rest of their season in Babylon. We see that God blesses Daniel with knowledge and wisdom and understanding, and he gave him the ability to have and interpret these crazy dreams and visions. And he also gave Daniel favor in Babylon, despite his background. The Babylonians didn't really like people from Judah and Jerusalem. They didn't really like a lot of the Israelites. But God gave Daniel favor in that situation. And we see that throughout their time there, that they were, far superior to anyone else working in the kingdom. And that's because Daniel was faithful to God. That's because Daniel took the time to come up with this game plan and remain faithful to God and didn't back down from it, but followed through on it and remained faithful to him. And so because of this, basically Daniel was blessed and gifted during this new season against all odds. Again, there was no reason for Daniel to have any sort of favor or blessings during this difficult new season, because that's not what Babylon was about, especially when it came to the Israelites. But yet he was. And so I think that this is just so applicable to what we should do in our lives when we're coming up against new seasons, when we're entering a new chapter of our lives, when we're starting something new. And so how can we apply this? How do we take what Daniel did and take Daniel's faithfulness and look at it, and how do we apply it to our lives? How do we remain faithful to God even when it seems like things are going to be challenging or just not work in our favor? And I think there are 3 things that we can do that we see in this chapter that makes it to where we can remain faithful to God and practically do it. Not just this obscure concept of like, I'm going to be faithful, but like actually living out that being faithful. So, first thing we should do, turn our focus to God and away from distractions. Now, Daniel could have easily, let himself become consumed with all of these negative emotions of fear and doubt and worry. Or Daniel could have easily just eaten all the king's food and drinking all the king's wine. Because also you have to think, the king probably had some pretty good food. Like, I'm sure the king was chowing down on some pretty great stuff. And Daniel could have chosen to do that. He could have chosen to defile himself. He could have chosen to just cave into his emotions and be fearful the whole time, or be worried, or just try to, skate by. But he didn't. Daniel instead vowed to not defile himself in the eyes of God, and he turned his focus to God. He turned away from those distractions, from those negative emotions, from those, temptations, and he just turned his focus to God. And so I think that's the first thing that we need to do during new seasons, is we need to turn our focus to God and away from our distractions, anything that's trying to bring us down or slow us down in any way. Turn from that and just turn to God. And now, the second thing that we see we can do through Daniel in a new season in our lives is that we need to come up with a game plan for tackling the new season. We didn't see that Daniel was just like, all right, God, I'm going to be faithful, and then he just sat there. No, we see that Daniel came up with a game plan. He came up with what he was going to do in tackling that new season head on, and it was, okay, I'm going to not defile myself. I'm going to ask a chief official to only let us eat vegetables and water for 10 days, and then let us prove ourselves there. And I'm going to, do all of these different things. He set out a real, tangible game plan for what to do. It was, okay, for these 10 days I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then this. It wasn't this just like, oh my gosh, there's, new stuff happening, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to, wing it and see what happens. Like, he came up with a real game plan for what to do. And I think that's what we should do. I think if we don't want to be overwhelmed or fearful about new seasons, we need to come up with a game plan of, okay, this week I'm going to do this, and this month I'm going to accomplish this, and by the end of this semester, this is going to be done, and by the end of this school year, I'm going to have this figured out, and I'm going to intentionally do this activity on these days. I'm going to intentionally do this for X amount of time. Sit down and really come up with a game plan. Not just like this abstract one in your head of, by the end of the school year, this. But really sit down and come up with your game plan of what you're going to do in that season, your timeline, your list of checkpoints that you want to reach. Come up with a game plan. And that will help you in grounding yourself and feeling like, okay, I got this. I can do this. This isn't just some big, obscure new season that's scary, but this is something I can really do. I can sit down and I can accomplish this. And so then that leads to the third and final thing that we should do. And that is that we should actually execute the plan with full faith in God's deliverance. So, again, it's one thing to sit and abstractly think about all these things, but we just need to get out there and do it. We need to get out there and actually execute the plan that we set out. If you have certain goals that you want accomplished in the month of August or in the first semester of the school year or throughout the whole school year, do it. If you have certain things that you want accomplished in a new job or a new relationship, do it. Come up with that plan, but then actually do it. And trust that because you've turned your focus to God and because you have come up with this plan, trust that He is going to deliver you. You know, Daniel could have easily doubted, like, hey, God, like, you know, I'm eating these vegetables and drinking this water, but that's not going to make me, you know, be strong and, you know, all these other qualities that the other men that are training are going to be who are eating the king's food. But he didn't doubt that. He trusted that God was going to deliver him fully. And that's what we need to remember as we are executing our plan, is that God is going to deliver us fully in that. He is going to bring us to exactly where we need to be. And so execute your plan. Actually get out there and do it. Don't just sit around and wait for it to happen, but actually execute that plan and just have full faith that God is going to deliver you. He never lets us down. He never will just leave us hanging. He's always going to deliver us in His timing. And that's so great. And we need to remember that, and we need to embrace that, especially as we're tackling new seasons in our lives. So, no matter how scary or difficult or uncertain a new season may seem, nothing's too bad for you to handle. Don't let your fears, doubts, emotions, or struggles stand in the way of you tackling that new change head on. As long as you focus on God, come up with a plan, and follow through on it, God will deliver you. And on top of that, we see that He will bless you in ways you can't even imagine. I mean, again, look at the end of Daniel chapter 1 and how Daniel and his friends were blessed by God and made like 10 times better than anyone else serving the king. God will bless you in that new season, and He will deliver you. So, be like Daniel and be faithful in each Babylon that life sends you into.